Hare Krishna. Thank you for inviting me to serve in this capacity. We will sing Jai Radha Madhava, and then we will discuss the verses for today, which is the last section of chapter 3 called Karma Yoga. So may I invite someone to sing Jai Radha Madhava? You just sing, we won't respond, but if we respond, we will do it on mute.
Hare Krishna Mataji, I can sing that Jai Radha Madhava.
Thank you.
Jaya Radha Madhava, Jaya Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava, Jaya Kunja Bihari, Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha, Jaya Girvaradhari, Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha, Jaya Girvaradhari, Jaya Yashodanandan, Brajjana Ranjan, Yashodanandan, Brajjana Ranjan, Yamuna Tira Banachari, Yamuna Tira Banachari, Jaya Radha Madhava, Jaya Kunj Bihari, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Nitai Gaur Premanande, Hari Hari Bol, Hari Hari Bol.
Thank you so much, Ritu. You have a beautiful voice. We will do some Mangalacharana prayers and then we will speak. Om Agyana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagachatan Sahagana Raghunathan Vitantam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namastute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhascha Kripa Sindhu Bevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimati Tama Krishna Goswamiti Namine Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Can you hear me okay? You can. Okay, perfect. Okay. So we are reading from chapter 3. And so far we have heard about Karma Yoga. And in text 34, which was yesterday, Krishna was telling Arjuna that we should regulate attachment and aversion, no? Because then if we can be equipoised or we are not attached to anything or averse to anything, then that is the process of yoga to balance everything. So then Arjuna asked this question in text 36, which I have put on the screen. I guess in this group you can read the Sanskrit. Would you mind? Would someone mind reading the text 36?
Yes, Mataji, Amit Prabhu will help read this today.
Okay.
And
Thank
anybody
you.
else wants to read, please raise your hands. Amit Prabhu, can you read the first text?
Yeah, Hare Krishna Mataji. Arjun uvacha अतः केन प्रयुक्तोऽयं पापं चरति पुरुषः अनिच्छानपि वार्ष्णेय बलादेव नियोजितः. Hare Krishna.
Okay. And then if someone can read the, let me see if I can get there. Read the translation.
Arjuna.
Okay.
Maybe
Go ahead, Prabhu. Go ahead.
Yeah. Arjuna said, O descendant of Vrashni, by what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly as if engaged by force?
Yeah, so Krishna is saying by regulating our sense, by regulating our work in our senses, we can become purified. Then Arjuna is saying, asking that sometimes we see, even though a person does not want to act sinfully, why does he do so? As if he's engaged by force. No? So some of the things in Srila Prabhupada's purport, which he brings up, that we know that originally the pure soul does not have any sinful proclivity, right? Because it's spiritual nature, spirit in nature. And therefore, there is no material contamination and he's pure. So, but once he comes, so Srila Prabhupada writes, although the living entity sometimes does not want to act in sin, he is still forced to act in sin. So then the implication may be that the Lord is forcing us to sin, right? Sinful actions are not, however, impelled by the super soul within, but are due to another cause. So Arjuna is not accusing the Lord of impelling us to commit sinful activities, but he's asking, and Krishna will explain in the next verse, what causes someone to act sinfully, even though he knows better, right? So which is text 37. And this is the final part of the chapter. So we will also do a summary at the end. Srila Prabhupada gives a very nice summary. Okay, text 37. Harilila Prabhu, Madhvi Mataji, would you like to read the Sanskrit for 37?
The 37, right?
Yeah.
Yes, 37.
The Supreme Personality of Godhead saying.
Sanskrit first.
Oh, Sanskrit first? Okay.
Yeah, Sanskrit.
Manuvacha. Kamayesa krodayesam rajo guna samadbhava mahasano mahapapma vidate na vairinyam.
Translation.
Yes.
The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, it is lust only. Arjun, which is born in a contact with the material mode of passion and later transformed into wrath, and which is all devouring sinful enemy of the world.
So Krishna is telling Arjuna, what is the reason for why someone commits sinful activity? So, and he says it is karma. Right? Karma is lust, translated into lust. And how does lust develop? It's because the living soul, the jiva, comes in touch with the mode of passion. And when the lust or desire is not fulfilled, it transforms or it changes into wrath, which is anger. And he says that this lust is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world. Krishna calls lust mahapapma, very greatly sinful, right? So Srila Prabhupada then explains how this happens, that when during creation, originally, the spirit soul originally we know is spirit, right? And spirit is always full of love, right? One of the things is we have love of God. But when we take on this material body, or when we come in touch with the mode of passion, that this love of God transforms into lust. In other words, the desire to please Krishna's senses becomes our desire to gratify our own senses because we want to become Krishna. That's why we come into this material world. We think, why should we serve Krishna and enjoy after he enjoys? We think, I should be the one who is enjoying independent of Krishna. So when we have that mentality, then that is called lust. But if we desire to serve Krishna out of love, then that's devotional service. And Srila Prabhupada gives this example that just as milk, if milk is in touch with a sour agent like tamarind, it becomes yogurt, right? Yogurt is nothing but milk transformed. Similarly, our love for Krishna, when it comes into this material world in association with the mode of passion, becomes lust, right? And when, like we said, if our desires are not fulfilled, then we become very angry. And we saw this in chapter 2, right? After anger, if we don't control anger, we become illusion, we fall into illusion, and then we fall into the material pool. This is the series of activities which happen. And therefore, this lust is the root cause of our being, of our doing sinful activities, we should say. Now, if we upgrade from the mode of passion to goodness, then that becomes devotional service. We can engage in devotional service easily, not that it becomes devotional service. But if in the mode of passion, we continue in the mode of passion and we go down further and become angry, then that's mode of ignorance, right? So this is with our independence and with our, as we gain transcendental knowledge, we can learn to go from the mode of passion and karma into the mode of goodness and transform into love of God. Or if we are going to be ignorant or want to degrade down, then we can become angry. And then from anger, we become illusioned, and then we fall back into the material plane. So, this Srila Prabhupada describes this. And then he describes that everything can be used in Krishna's service, pretty much all. So even when we become lusty and we are unhappy because of that, or we become angry, even anger can be used in Krishna's service, right? The example he gives is Hanuman. Hanuman became very angry with Ravan, and therefore he burned down the city of Lanka. So this is proper utilization of anger. But if anger is not utilized properly, not utilized in Krishna's service, then we will fall into illusion. We will make wrong choices, right? So it is not that. So Srila Prabhupada is saying when lust or our karma is used in Krishna's service, we want to please Krishna's senses. That is love. That can turn into love of God, and similarly, anger can turn into a favorable form of devotional service. So then these two emotions become our friends instead of our enemies. So this is, so here Krishna is identifying what is the enemy, what causes us to be, to become, to do sinful activities, right? And then he describes the nature of this enemy. If we have an enemy and where they reside, what is their nature, then we know how to control that particular enemy. So Srila Prabhupada then in the next verse describes that this lust or this attachment for our own sense gratification has 3 different degrees. It can be very light, or it can be very heavy. And he gives this analogy to help us understand in text 38. So I need someone who can, Mihika, you can read the Sanskrit. Are you okay with that?
Yes, Mataji.
Thank you.
Dhūmenāvriyate vanet yatādārsho malena ca yatolbenavruto garbhas tatha tene damavritam.
Would you like to read the
Mataji,
translation? Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
As fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of this lust.
Awesome. Thank you. So Krishna is explaining that the living entity, the spirit, pure spirit soul, like the jiva, his consciousness can be covered by lust to different degrees. Like, and he gives these 3 examples, like smoke in the fire. So when you have smoke in the fire, you can still see the fire, but the fire is not as bright. So when it's like our consciousness is covered, but it's still visible. And the example of, so there's very mild covering of lust or karma over the living entity's consciousness. And this degree of covering is considered, is like, the example is given of human beings, right? We are spirit souls, and we can exhibit our pure Krishna consciousness, but if we are not doing devotional service, it's covered, just like the smoke covering the fire. So sometimes people may engage in philanthropic activities or humanitarian activities. So they are doing something beyond themselves, but it is still not pure love of God, no? Because there's still some attachment there. There's still some impurity. So this is human beings. There's preliminary Krishna consciousness or preliminary love of God. Then the second one he describes is the dust on the mirror. When there's a mirror with dust, you can still see your reflection, but it is blurred. It's not so clear. So when the, whereas the fire burns very brightly, so we can see it well, right? We can still, but if the mirror is covered by dirt, it's very hard to see our image. So when the consciousness is covered a little more, like in animals, right? In animals, they are more conscious than say trees, but they are less conscious than us. No, they have a basic knowledge of survival. They know how to take care of the young ones. They protect their tribes. So they have some idea or understanding of something beyond their own self or their own selfishness, right? So this is considered like the animals. And then finally is the womb, the embryo in the womb. The baby in the womb is bound up in a very tight situation, and he cannot even move, right? And you cannot see the baby in the womb. So when the consciousness is so covered that you cannot even perceive it easily, that is considered to be the grossest or the heaviest covering of Maya on the living entity. And the example of this is the tree. The trees, their consciousness cannot be easily, we cannot see that a tree is conscious very easily, no? They don't complain when we cut them, or they don't, like talk back to us like that. So that consciousness is very covered. And the more gross the covering is, the harder it is to uncover. The harder it is for us, for that living entity to develop his consciousness, his original consciousness, which is Krishna consciousness. So we can see that because the living entity in the human form of life is the least covered, it's the easiest for him to get out of this conditioned life. Whereas for a tree, which is covered by so much Maya or lust, very hard for that living entity to take up Krishna consciousness. So Krishna is very systematically describing how the different attributes of this enemy. So if we understand the enemy, then we know how to conquer, right? So then he goes on to describe a little bit more. Let me see if I can get this down. Okay, text 39. Any volunteers for the reading? You can put up your hand. Okay, Barsana Rani, yes, thank you. Barsana, you have to unmute your mic. Barsana, can you unmute, Barsana?
Yeah.
Okay, we can hear you, but it's very faint.
Okay.
Okay, that's better.
Avutam jnanametena jnanino nitya vairina kamarupena kaunteya vikurena malena cha.
You read the translation? Is it okay?
Yes, translation by His Divine Grace Bhakti Swami Srila Prabhupada. Thus, the wise living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire.
Yeah, so you see here, Krishna is saying that this lust is our eternal enemy. Like it's forever our enemy, and it is never satisfied and burns like fire. So fire will consume everything, right? Which comes in contact with. So so Krishna gives this analogy that no matter how much sense gratification we give to the living entity, you cannot satisfy his lust. Just as if you give a large amount, if you keep supplying fuel to the fire cannot be extinguished. It actually burns more. So sometimes people say that, let me enjoy sense gratification, and that at some point I will become fed up, because in material life, everything is temporary, right? But Krishna is certifying that lust is never satisfied. So the way to control lust is not to feed it, but actually to punish it, right? In the Niti Shastra, it is said that if there's an enemy, there are 4 ways to control an enemy, right? Someone knows what are the 4 ways? Chanakya Pandit says. Radhe Govinda, would you like to say? Your hand is up. What are the ways?
My hand was up for reading, but I don't know.
Okay. What is? Okay, so the first way is said is by speaking sweet words, right? If you have an enemy, someone who doesn't like you, you can make them more favorable by just praising them, giving them sweet words. If that doesn't work, then the next step is you give them a gift. By giving a gift to someone who doesn't like you, it may change their hearts and their minds. So they may become controlled or become favorable. Then if that doesn't work, the next step is to give them some position, right? To give them some position, or give them some, what do you say? You give them praise, or give them a position where they will feel, okay, this person really respects me, And then finally, if that doesn't work, then you punish. You can use punishment. So Krishna is saying this lust is so bad, it is so strong and so powerful, that the other 3, speaking sweet words, giving them a position, or giving them a gift, will not work. You have to punish. So in other words, the senses have to be controlled. You cannot just satisfy them, and you cannot give them you can pacify them by words, by speaking to them, or giving them a gift. Oh, I'll give you so much sense gratification. No, then you will stop. No, as we feed the fire, the lust actually increases. So here Srila Prabhupada gives a very good analogy. First of all, he says that in the material world, the center of all activities is sex, which means attachment, right, to the opposite sex. And this can be very gross, or it can be subtle in the form of, like, we look for profit, adoration, or distinction, right? And therefore, this material world is called Maithunya Agara, or the shackles of sex life. So in the prison house, criminals are shackled or kept within bars, right? The bars are keeping them under control. And the criminals who are disobedient to the law of the Lord are shackled by sex life. Very important point for us to understand, because we are looking for gratification, or we're looking for enjoyment outside of Krishna consciousness. This is what happens. We get attached. We are looking for pleasure, and the highest pleasure in the material life is sex life, and that is what is causing us to be materially entangled. And like we said, it can be gross or subtle. And a person who is shackled by material enjoyment is because he's ignorant. He doesn't know his real position is that he is part of God, right? He's a part and parcel of God, and he's eternally blissful. He forgets that actually I have this treasure, and he's looking for treasure outside, right? So, and like we said, because of ignorance, then he becomes conditioned in this material life. The mode of passion falls down into ignorance. And then, so now we know the nature of this enemy, right? Is the Mahapapma, is the sinful karma, is like the greatest enemy. It is very strong. It cannot be satisfied. The only way you can control it or bring it under control is to punish it. So now, where do you find this thing, right? Someone may ask, where do I find this lust? Where is it sitting? Because if the enemy is there, the enemy will will take some strategic positions, right? If you're at war, like now Ukraine is at war with Russia. So Russia has occupied some strategic positions in Ukraine. They specifically target certain areas, like they target the hospitals, they target emergency services, because they know if these things are gone, people who are injured, they cannot get help, and it'll break up the morale. So similarly, lust has also conquered some places within the body. And if we know where lust is sitting, then we can know, okay, like where to go, where to get them, right? So this is text 40. Some Sanskrit person who can speak Sanskrit. Okay, Radha Govinda, is your hand still up?
Yes, Mataji. Hare
You'd like
Krishna,
to read?
Mataji. Yes, Mataji. Hare Krishna, Dandavat Pranams.
Hare Krishna.
Text 40. Indriyani manobuddhir yasya dashtanamachyate eter vimo hayate sa jnanam avritya dehinam. Translation. The senses, the mind, and the intelligence are setting places of this lust. Though through them, lust covers the real knowledge of living entity and bewilders him. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. So Krishna is saying that there are three places where this lust resides. From the most gross to the subtle, he's putting them. The senses, the mind, and the intelligence is where this karma stays. So this is where it starts, right? And so the senses are the most gross. And Srila Prabhupada says these are different strategic positions in the body, right? And the way this works is that the senses come in touch with the sense objects, right? And then because they come in touch with the sense objects, there is some enjoyment. And therefore the mind desiring something desirable or something which gives pleasure comes under the control of the senses. And if the mind is not controlled by intelligence, then the intelligence also becomes polluted, right? So here Srila Prabhupada says the mind is the center of all activities of the senses. And thus, when we hear about sense objects, the mind generally becomes a reservoir of all ideas of sense gratification. And therefore, this is where they are repositories of lust, right? These are the go-downs where lust resides, in the mind and the senses. Next, the intelligence department becomes the capital of such lustful propensities. So then the intelligent also becomes, if the mind and senses are not controlled or contaminated, then the intelligence also becomes contaminated. And then the thing is, intelligence is the immediate next door neighbor of the soul. Lusty intelligence influences the spirit soul to acquire a false ego and identify itself with matter, and thus with the mind and senses. So the soul, we are originally the soul, and the intelligence, good intelligence, spiritual intelligence, is like the bodyguard to the intelligence, to the soul. So the service of the intelligence is to protect the jiva's constitutional position, which is servant of Krishna. But if the intelligence, the guard, is bribed by a mind which is wicked, the mind which is not controlled, then the intelligence will this bribed intelligence does not do its service of protecting the jiva, and therefore and takes over the spiritual nature of the living entity, right? So we can think about intelligence like that this intelligence is the next door neighbor of the soul. And so the good intelligence is very important for us. If the intelligence is lost, then we are prone to fall into sense gratification, right? And how do we purify the intelligence? Is by transcendental knowledge, which Krishna will speak about in the next chapter. And Srila Prabhupada, okay, we'll just go from here. Okay, now after saying that about this, the mind intelligence. So of all, and then now how do you control, right? So Srila Prabhupada says, therefore, okay, we will read the Sanskrit first before I run ahead. Someone with 40, Arjuna Mitra Prabhu, text 41. You have to unmute. You are muted.
Yes.
Thank you.
तस्मात्त्वमिन्द्रियाण्याद्यो नियम्य भरतर्षभ पाप्मानं प्रजहिद्येन ज्ञानविज्ञाननाशनम्. Therefore, O Arjun, based on the parts in the very beginning, curb this great symbol of sin, lust, by regulating the sense and slay this reservoir of knowledge and self-realization.
Okay. So Krishna is saying that we have identified that this lust resides in these three places, right? In the senses, the mind, and the intelligence. So he's saying that curb this sin, this lust, by regulating the senses. Because the senses are the most gross, right? It's easier to regulate the senses than to regulate the mind. So our sadhana bhakti process, it trains us or disciplines us to actually regulate the senses. And if we regulate the senses, then the mind becomes purified. So we have these 4 regulative principles. We call them the 4 regulative principles of freedom. This is what Krishna describes, that by controlling our senses, it'll purify the senses. And then the mind will be purified. If the mind is purified, our intelligence will be purified, right? And he says, how do we do this? By getting knowledge. And Srila Prabhupada gives a very nice definition here of Gyan and Vigyan. So I wanted to just point this out. We understand, what is the difference? What is Gyan? Gyan refers to knowledge, we say, right? And Vigyan, we say, is realized knowledge. Here is Srila Prabhupada's definition a little bit further. He says, Gyan refers to knowledge that the spirit soul is not this body. So to understand this body and the spirit are different, and that the jiva is not the body, I'm not this body, is Gyan. This is the first thing we learn, right? When we take up Krishna consciousness. And Vigyan, what we call realized knowledge, refers to specific knowledge of the spirit soul's constitutional position and his relationship to the Supreme Lord. So realized knowledge means to know that our constitutional position means we are servants of God, and what is our duty, right? We are servants of God and we are meant to serve him. So very nice definition, I feel like Srila Prabhupada gives of Gyan and Vigyan, right? So if we understand that we are spirit souls, we are eternally blissful and meant to serve the Lord, by such knowledge, we can easily control the senses. And if we control the senses, like we said, we can control the mind. And by this knowledge, we will understand that we are meant to serve God, or this is purified consciousness, which we call Krishna consciousness. And then Prabhupada says that if we are educated from the beginning, that we are meant, the living entity, we are meant to serve God, then we won't fall prey to karma. But he says, but it does not matter, even if it's so late in life, right? If you have gray hairs like me, at this point, if we understand that we are meant to serve God, we are meant to have love of God rather than karma, sense gratification, it is still not late. We can still take up Krishna consciousness, even at a late stage, right? So by following the regulative principles, by this process of sadhana bhakti that he's given us. And then about, so Srila Prabhupada or Krishna here says that we can control this lust by regulating the senses. And someone may ask, okay, we have got one strategic position, which is the senses. What about the mind and the intelligence? How do we control that? What happens there? So here's the next verse with a hierarchy is given. So text 42, Kamal Shah Prabhu, would you like to read the Sanskrit?
Yes, Mataji. Indriyani Ranyar
Could you speak a little bit like closer to the mic? Very
Okay,
faint.
sure. Indriyani paranyaho indriyebhyah param manah nasastu parabhuddhir yo buddhehe paratastu saha. Translation.
Yes.
The working senses are superior to dull matter. Mind is higher than the senses. Intelligence is higher than the mind. And he, the soul, is even higher than the intelligence.
Okay. So here Krishna is giving the hierarchy, no? So what he's saying is that we talked about controlling the senses. The senses are stronger than matter, right? And we already said that after the senses are lower than the mind, and then the intelligence is higher than the mind. And beyond the intelligence is the soul. So how are we doing? Time 11. So I like the way Srila Prabhupada writes. He says the senses are different outlets for the activities of lust, right? Lust is within the body, reserved, right? The body is a warehouse or a godown of lust. But this lust is given when? Through the senses. By the senses, we are giving, the lust is being displayed, right? And when these outlets are not in use, then there is Krishna consciousness. When we don't give vent to our lusts through the senses, when we are not using our senses for sense gratification, then we will naturally use them in Krishna's service, because the senses cannot be inactive. And therefore we will engage in Krishna consciousness, right? So Srila Prabhupada says, when we stop acting the senses, that means stopping bodily activities. But since the mind is active, even though the body may be silent or at rest, the mind will act. We have experience of this, right? You can put a child in the corner and tell him that he's gone time out, but his mind doesn't stop acting, right? But the mind can be controlled by the intelligence, right? And the intelligence, good intelligence will come from the soul, and the soul is next to the super soul. So if the soul is engaged with the Supreme Lord or the super soul, then naturally the intelligence and then the mind, which is below that, and then the senses will all be controlled, right? And this is the process of Krishna consciousness. By our process of sadhana bhakti, which Srila Prabhupada has given us, this is how we control and spiritualize our existence, by spiritualizing our senses, our mind, and our intelligence. And then even though we have these material senses, we have this material mind, and we have the intelligence, these repositories will become just like a serpent without teeth. No? If you have a snake or a serpent, if you remove the teeth, then the serpent cannot have any poisonous effect. He cannot bite. So therefore, if we control the senses through Krishna consciousness, then even though these are material things, we will be our consciousness will not be contaminated, and we can pursue our Krishna consciousness, or actually strengthen it. So, and then Srila Prabhupada or Krishna ends with this, that if we have this knowledge, this is what happens. This is the last verse of this text, of this chapter. Can someone read? Let's see who has this. Or Hemangini, Mataji, can you please read the Sanskrit and the English translation?
Yes, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Evam buddhe param buddhva sanstavya manam atmanam jahi satrum mahabaho kamarupam durasadam. Translation. Thus, knowing oneself to be transcendental to the material senses, mind and intelligence, O mighty armed Arjuna, one should steady the mind, deliberate spiritual intelligence, Krishna consciousness, and thus, by spiritual strength, conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust.
Okay. So Krishna concludes that by transcendental knowledge, right, we can control or transcend this material senses, mind, and intelligence. Right. And then by doing this, we can control lust, which is the enemy we are trying to find. Srila Prabhupada gives a summary of this chapter in these few lines. So I thought it is good for us to read, so that it'll, what shall we say, it'll summarize the chapter for us. Need someone who can read properly. Nimai Sundari, can you read? Are you able to read?
Mataji, I can read.
Okay. I don't know.
Just the translation or the purpose?
Just the highlighted part.
Okay. This third chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is conclusively directive to Krishna consciousness by knowing oneself as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Personality of the Godhead without considering impersonal voidness the ultimate end. In the material existence of life, one is certainly influenced by propensities for lust and desire for dominating the resources of material nature. Desire for overloading and for sense gratification is the greatest enemy of the conditioned soul. But by the strength of Krishna consciousness, one can control the material senses, the mind, and the intelligence. One may not give up work and prescribe duties all of a sudden, but by gradually developing Krishna consciousness, one can be situated in a transcendental position without being influenced by the material senses and the mind. By steady intelligence directed towards one's pure identity. Thank you, Mataji.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have, in this chapter, Krishna talked about how by transcendental knowledge, we can undergo gradual purification, not just, he talked about sannyas in the beginning, and then purify our actions, our activities. We perform Nishkam Karma Yoga. And by performing Nishkam Karma Yoga, that becomes devotional service because we are doing the activities for the satisfaction of Krishna. And therefore, our karma becomes Karma Yoga, or Nishkam Karma Yoga, actually, which is the better position to act for the satisfaction or pleasure of Krishna. So I will stop here and take questions or comments. You can raise your hand or your virtual hand, or you can just raise your physical hand. Hemangini, is that hand up or you forgot to put it down? Down, okay.
Hare Krishna devotees, if anybody has a question for Mataji, please raise your hand. And I'm pretty sure you have got so much information, so much knowledge, so much wisdom in today's class. Mataji, this reminded me that these are the questions that come pretty often in most of the classes about how to control the mind, how to control the senses. So today you reverse engineered that for us, and it is our big, virtue that we have you as a speaker. It is very good luck that we are listening to you today, and we are able to crack the code that why our senses always bewilder us. Mihika, you have a question? Please unmute yourself.
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
I learned, thank you, Mataji, for the class. So I learned a lot about how Karma Yoga is, about Karma Yoga, and a lot, like how Krishna and Srila Prabhupada explained it in the purport. So Mataji, I just wanted to have I asked for some helpful tips about like how to control the mind. Like even during, if you try chanting or anything like devotional, or even in normal studying, our mind just wanders everywhere. So like, how do you control that in one place?
Are you a student or you are working?
Mataji, I'm a student.
Okay. How old are you?
11.
Okay. Well, that's very intelligent for 11. Have you been going through this while the classes have been going on? Chapter 2?
Like in some of them, Mataji.
In some of them, okay. Okay, because in chapter 2, are you aware, or you probably have heard about having a higher taste?
Yeah.
Yeah, would you like to explain that to me?
So like basically like a higher taste would be like the level, like you like what you like to do, and to have like more like normal, to have a higher level of that,
Yes.
of
So
like what you like to do.
yeah, so right now, like you are a prasaditarian, right? You eat prasadam. If someone told you and gave you a hamburger, would you eat it?
No.
So, and even your mind would not tell you, no, because you have a higher taste.
Yes.
Right? So when we develop a higher taste, then it's easy to give up the lower taste. So Rita Maharaj gives this very nice example about a higher taste. He says, like, if your brother or young sister has a knife in their hand, right? You know it's dangerous in their hand. How do you get them to give up the knife? Because they may hurt themselves. What would we do? Do we snatch the knife? Do we tell them to give it to us? What should we do?
So we should like kind of like engage them into something else, or explain to them that this is bad for you, and then persuade them to give it to you.
Yeah, you can. That's good. You started this first thing, right? You speak to them, right? And then you persuade them. What if you talk to them, but still they are like they're not giving it up? Which is what we are trying to do when we control the mind, right? We are persuading them, we're talking to the mind nicely. We're telling them, okay, this is not good for us, but still the mind doesn't listen. Then what do we do? What do we do with the child, with the knife? We talk to them and they are not giving up the knife. If you have mothers know this trick.
Then I would kind of like engage them in something else, and like they'll drop it, so then I'll take it away from them.
Yes, you got it. So if they have a favorite toy, right? Or they have some favorite prasadam, if you engage them, because they're holding on to the knife with their hands, right? With the senses. If you engage the hands in something which they have a higher taste for, if they like the toy, their favorite toy, then it's very easy. You don't have to catch the toy, the higher taste, they have to drop the knife. So if we have a higher taste in Krishna consciousness, then it's easy for us to drop the lower taste, to give up the lower taste. So if the mind gets a lot of pleasure from devotional activities, so how do we develop the higher taste? That's the next question, right?
Yeah.
We develop the higher taste because we learn about Krishna. When you listen to his word, like listening to Bhagavad Gita, you hear about his pastimes from the Bhagavatam. You associate with devotees who have a lot of affection. They give very nice katha. You listen to kirtan. All these things are giving you pleasure. By developing that higher taste, then slowly the desire for the lower taste will go. The mind wandering to things which are not desirable will go away, right? Just like your desire for a hamburger is actually niyam, right? Similarly, the mind's desire to chant or the mind's desire to focus on Krishna will become more. The more we feed the higher taste. Sometimes when we try to stop something, it becomes more stubborn, no? The mind becomes more stubborn. No, they insist. But we can dance with the mind instead of fighting with the mind and give them some higher taste. So that works well. And how do you do it? By constant practice. We have to practice. And also slowly the detachment will come. So just having the desire to stop it is not enough. Because the mind needs some engagement, right? If we don't give the mind good engagement, it'll automatically go to the things which are not useful. So therefore, we have to constantly give the mind good spiritual engagement, and then it'll be easy to control the senses. So you see the process Prabhupada has given us. He tells us to chant japa, to follow, to follow the morning program or some kind of program to glorify, our spiritual preceptors, the guru, to read Shastra, to associate with devotees, to have prasadam. All these are supportive activities which help us develop the higher taste, which help control the mind. So even though, you are 11 years old and you are already knowing so much about devotional service, means there's some training. This training seems to be like ordinary, but actually it's not. It is slowly, slowly purifying the mind to become more absorbed. It's developing or refining us to have more attraction for Krishna. So, and then every time you catch your mind doing something right, it's very important to congratulate the mind, right? We are very quick to say, if we do something wrong, we are very quick to say, oh, I missed by 2 points, right? Or I scored maybe like 98. You don't look at, you scored 98%, you missed by 2 points. So this is the tendency. So whenever you catch yourself doing something good, you have to acknowledge that also. And that's sometimes where we are lacking. We're always seeing, okay, oh, today I did not, I was not attentive to my rounds. No, I wasn't attentive to this round. But when you find yourself chanting attentively, or you find yourself, oh, today I choose to read Bhagavatam instead of watching TV. When you see yourself doing the right thing, then give yourself a pat on the back or an extra sweet or because that will help. Whatever you focus on more will show up more. The mind does not distinguish between what not to do and what to do. It works on the subject, no? So that's also, it's important to celebrate your wins. That's one thing we should also practice. Okay, so catch yourself doing the right thing. That's important too.
Okay,
does that answer your question to some degree? And just practice.
Yes.
And every time you do something a little bit better, then tell the mind, this is very good. And then when you tell, then your consciousness and your mind becomes, oh, I can do this much. I can still do more,
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Mihika, for the question, and Mataji for the answer. I think everybody else got enlightened as well. If anybody else has question, you can raise your hands. I have a question in the chat, Mataji. One person has sent a chat message about how to stay situated in material world when we see people progressing and our senses telling us the other story.
Let me see if I...
Yeah, I think the question means like, yes, we should control our senses. Yes, we should control our mind. But when we see other people maybe, flourishing more or maybe not doing bhakti, and then our mind tells us another narrative, which is like, oh, look, they are so happy. So in that point, your mind is creating illusion for you. It's giving you more like distress or anxiety because of that when you start comparing yourself. So should devotees be comparing ourselves in material world with others?
Part of our conditioning is that we compare ourselves to others, no? If you look at someone who seems to be flourishing, remember that our life is like a movie. You're seeing one frame. The movie has frozen at this particular point, at particular time, and that's what you are seeing. You don't know what he did before, and you don't know the consequence of what he's doing now. No? So just judging that someone seems to be flourishing at this point does not mean that he'll continue to flourish in the future, because Krishna says this material world is temporary, right? And he has certified also that it's full of misery. So you are seeing him at a point where you think, oh, he seems to be doing very well, but there's just one point in the whole, we say you have a global view, but when you're seeing him, you're just seeing at that one particular point, or like in a movie, you're seeing a particular frame. If you wait long enough, the nature of the world is without spiritual life, misery is bound to come. Even when we practice spiritual life, misery comes, but we know how to deal with it in a very, in the proper way, right? We don't get hung up by it. So understanding that whatever you are seeing now is temporary will help. And then also understanding that, this, temporary will help. It's not. And then the other thing to understand is that when this life finishes, he will have nothing to show. It's zero, right? He has to start again from ABC. Whereas with spiritual life, when your life ends, you will actually start where you left off. So that will, so that's also understanding that this is temporary, the temporary nature of this enjoyment. And one other thing is Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita that anything we see which is extraordinary is but a spark of Krishna's splendor. So to move the mind from envy or from comparing to being appreciative and actually seeing the silver lining. If you see someone doing extremely well, we can also be their well-wisher and give off a more like a positive vibe and thinking, oh, this person is very fortunate. Krishna, he has this opulence of fame, or he has this opulence of succeeding, and this is just, if this is a spark of Krishna's splendor, just imagine how much more splendid and powerful is the Supreme Lord who I am serving. So that would also help. And Srila Prabhupada also gave this example that sometimes we see someone who's not doing devotional service flourishing, and the devotee is not flourishing, because Krishna is helping us develop our spiritual muscles. So we will know how to, Srila Prabhupada said, if Krishna wants, he can give you the whole world. The question is, what will you do with it? So we are not pure enough to handle the opulence Krishna has given us. That opulence or that success will go to our heads. So Krishna is there for curtailing it. So when we are mature enough, these opulences will come. So I think those are the few things we can use, we can think to change our mindset.
Thank you so much, Mataji. Yeah, that is very, very beneficial even for, neophytes or mature devotees, because sometimes we compare, but I think it's like if you see Krishna everywhere, you will be much more satisfied and there won't be any negative or adverse feeling if we think, oh, this is Krishna. Like, I think Ritudhaj Maharaj was here and he said, even in water, if you see Krishna, you will start loving water, because everywhere where you see Krishna, that out of the 6 opulences, you will be appreciative rather than saying anything wrong. So we'll see if we have any more questions. If not, then we can wind up the session. Anybody has any last minute question? You can raise your hands. This was very power-packed session. Thank you, Mataji. Keep coming in Parsati Foundation, because this is so power-packed that we learned what we learned from 5-6 hours of listening. So thank you so much. We have no more question, Mataji. So we can wind up the session.
Thank you. Then we'll offer Vaishnava Pranam and then we can stop the session, right? You
Yes,
can unmute if you want and we will say.
Everybody can unmute themselves.
Let us offer our respectful obeisances to all Vaishnava devotees of the Lord, who are just like desired priests and fulfill the desires of everyone and are full of compassion for the fallen conditioned souls.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Mataji.
Krishna Mataji.
Thank you, Mataji. Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Manani Mataji. Hari Bol.